Hi, everybody. Jeff Stein, Plan Giving Marketing. The next in our installment of PSA's Practical Solution Announcements. And as always, I'm joined by our good friend and colleague, Greg Wilson. Greg is the Senior Major Gift and Plan Giving Officer at Good Shepherd Rehab in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you.
In this series, we are talking about the difference between marketing and fundraising and the things that you can do as a marketer that are going to help your fundraising effort. So often, we are having conversations with clients and prospective clients about prospect identification and who should be included in the marketing. And I'm a really, really big fan of prospect identification and a lot of these external data tools to help fundraisers to narrow their focus on who they're going to visit and maybe who they're going to call. But I find that the more fundraisers pay attention to these metrics, the more that they are eliminating people from the marketing who would really be good prospects. The most typical segmentation done is age-based segmentation. And I would agree that, if you're focusing on end-of-life gifts, if you're focusing on IRA rollover gifts, if you're focusing on CGAs, it only makes sense to have those conversations with people in a bracket, an age bracket for whom that gift is appropriate. But as we've talked about earlier in this series, that the marketing that is highly targeted and highly educational leaves out a majority of your audience. So today, Greg and I are going to talk about prospect identification for marketing, not prospect identification for fundraising. So Greg, we've talked about this topic a lot also, and you've had some pretty interesting things to say about it. Why don't you share with us what you were sharing with me before about these wealth screens and how you use wealth screens for fundraising and how you consider other tools or other data points in your donor file for marketing. Just draw that distinction between analytics for fundraising versus list accumulation for marketing.
Sure. As far as I'll start on the marketing side, in my opinion, for the marketing list, you always want to try to just make that as wide as possible. As we've talked on some of our earlier calls and conversations, you can't make decisions for your donors. You really want to try to identify who loves you the most is the simple answer, like who has supported your organization for the longest, who has, as we've left about before, who's given every time that you've made a request and said, hey, we could use your help right now. My opinion, they're the people that you want to throw that net as wide as possible and to just throw in the top end of your fundraising funnel. Like you want to more identify who likes you and who loves you and let that work its way through that fundraising funnel. For the external wealth screenings for fundraising, I always have two phrases that I use around that pretty frequently. I think that wealth screenings are useful tools, but I think that they should refine your sort of high target fundraising list rather than actually define it. I've found in my experience that there's a significant number of high net worth individuals that, not for any malicious reason, but just because of good planning purposes, they look terrible on paper. And then I've seen other people that just because of what zip code they live in and a few other sort of more noticeable assets that they might possess show up incredibly high on a wealth screening. And that, neither could be further from the truth in the grand scheme of things. But it's nice to, as a fundraiser, when you're sitting down and looking at that, oh my gosh, I'm brand new to this position, especially. I have 120 names that I have on this list that I need to start building a relationship with. You need something that helps you figure out where you're going to start from. And that's where I see wealth screenings being useful for, is to then just help you come up with some priority way to start reaching out to people. But when it comes to marketing, it's more all about just how many people can you identify that love you, that you can start to get your message out in front of about, this is our mission, this is what we do, and start building that trust with them so that they know that they can not be afraid when they do finally make it to that 120 person list and you reach out and call them.
Exactly. And I think it's important to maybe discuss why some of these screening tools or why some of this prospect identification is important for very, very, very large organizations, and maybe why it would be an area not to focus on as intensely if you are starting with a smaller list. When nobody has an unlimited budget, nobody can justify marketing plan giving to tens of hundreds of thousands of donors. If you say, for example, you're a national charity with millions and millions of names on your list, it's just not cost effective or practical to wallpaper the country with plan giving marketing solicitations to people that you don't really have a connection to. But for a lot of smaller organizations, community hospitals, independent schools, small colleges, the need to shrink your list for marketing and budgeting purposes is not nearly as significant as if you are dealing with millions and millions of records. So my encouragement to the smaller organizations that are watching this or and the ones that we work with is, don't put yourself in the same position as the mega national fundraisers when they're doing their prospect identification, when they're doing their wealth screen. They have no choice but to pare down their list to the best prospects because the list that they're starting with is just too big. Smaller organizations, you don't have that problem. Granted, you probably have a smaller budget. Granted, you have to be smart about how you manage that budget, but you don't have to limit your marketing to the very cream of the crop. Greg, you were talking about the wealthy people who don't look wealthy through wealth screens, or the people who live in expensive zip codes who are not philanthropic. Talk about the other side of the equation, right? The millionaire next door, and the opportunities that you might miss if you rely too heavily on their demographic data to consider them a good marketing, to consider including them in your marketing.
And I would say that this again just goes back to focusing on to sound like a 70s, 60s or 70s hippie there, but to just focus on the love. Find the people that you know like you the most and that want to support you and your mission the most, and focus on them. I've had many conversations with people that on the outside, on paper, they don't look like very much. On the car that they drive to meet me at the random diner someplace, they don't look like they're very much. And then when we've built trust over time, and then we have some of these very important conversations and they break things down for me. It's thankfully, at least I hope I have a pretty good poker face when they share what their net worth is with me and say, well, you know what, I do this here because you've shown me ways that I can make an impact. And I just think that there's many more people like that out there than there are these people that show up with the big flashing lights when you run the wealth screening, and it's like, oh my gosh, this person like broke the system because how much they have. And it just, I keep, that's one of my sort of main points that I hammer. You just focus on the people that love you. And especially when there's all sorts of uncertainty going on in the world, that, in my opinion, is the best predictor to look at, is how much they've liked you in the past and how they continue to like you today.
So I'm going to try to use some hand signals here. Where our sales funnel, our fundraising funnel, if you are a marketer who is pre-disqualifying those people who are not highly rated in wealth screens or other planned or major giving models, you're starting with a very, very small funnel, and you're limited to the conversations with people in that funnel. But if you expand the funnel, right, to include more people who may be less affluent on paper, who don't live in the right zip code, who have not written big checks to you or to other organizations, you are precluding yourself from having an opportunity, like Greg does, to find out more about what their capacity is in the context of a conversation of how they want to make an impact on your organization. So, fundraisers out there, as you are preparing to ramp up your marketing in the coming fiscal year or the months ahead, because we know that you got to do the marketing to get the conversations going, because you're not having any events, you're not going to have face-to-face visits, you got to do more outbound to get more inbound. Consider the people who are not in the bottom part of the funnel because of their wealth screen. education clients, retired staff and faculty, long-term volunteers, parents and grandparents who've given beyond the years that their children were enrolled at your school, whether that's an independent school or a college. On the healthcare side, the volunteers, the people who open the doors and sit in the lobby and usher your patients, from the front door to their appointments when hospitals and doctors and places like that reopen for business. So often we're reminding our clients, don't forget these people who show their love for your organization through their actions, not just their checks. The people who show up every single day, the people who continue to support you well beyond the time that you are providing direct services to them. So again, fundraisers out there, it's time to market. It's time to get disciplined and intentional about your marketing. And one of the things that we want to advise you is, yes, in fundraising, focus on the areas where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. That's the bottom of the funnel. Marketing, start with a wider funnel, bring more people into the funnel, and through marketing, get those people who may not look as remarkable on paper to show that they're remarkable through their engagement with your marketing over time. So for Greg Wilson, I'm Jeff Stein. Thanks for listening. As always, look in the description to this video for a link with some useful information or an opportunity to reach out to us to have a conversation about how plant giving marketing can help your organization bring more people into the top of the funnel so you're having more conversations and more gifts come out of the bottom of the funnel. Thanks again. Have a great day.